Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop RPG news, game design review, and just overall halfway decent people podcast. Teos is the halfway positive decent person. Teos, how you doing? I haven't seen you since Gamehole.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say I miss not having the audience here.
Oh,
That live show was so special and so cool, and I've been on a high since then. In fact, like I just put out a video this morning because I was like, I'm excited to create again. Like it Gamehole itself just like pumped me up, made me ready to do more. So I've got a video on traps that I put out, and I'm recording one on
yeah.
encounter design today because the whole math has changed. It's all real fun. How are you doing?
It is. I'm doing well. I feel the same way you did. I had a great time at Game Con. Came home with four foreigners in tow, two from Australia, one from England, and one from Canada, to have a sort of Ghostfire Gaming working week, and it
Yeah.
was really cool to show the Australian folks and Martin from England around, and get a lot of work done and have some good time. So it's been a whirlwind 2 weeks, and I'm really just today. Yesterday was like the first day I could recover from it,
Mm-hmm.
but that show we had our live recording on Sunday morning at 9 a.m., which is usually a dead time. And we've had panels in that place where there's like five or six people in the audience. And so I was like, okay, if we can fill up half this room, that would be great. It was packed.
It
It
was
was,
amazing.
I don't know if there was an empty seat, to the point where somebody raised their hand to ask a question. I pointed, or you pointed, and they stood up, and it was uh, oh shoot, the army veteran who works. He's working on
Anthony
the
Joyce
tape.
Rivera?
Anthony Joyce Rivera. Thank you. I didn't even know he was there. He just sort of raised his hand and then stood up so we could hear him. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, Anthony's here! I didn't even know." It was quite wild.
I had that too, where I forget who it was, but someone, same thing. Someone said something, and I was like, oh, I didn't even see you in the audience. And I'm like, wow, like those first few years where we would record, like there would be just, a few people we'd recognize. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that was really cool. That was awesome. Yeah, I told my whole family about it. Like, this is so
Yep.
fun. Yeah.
It was. And now we're going to keep that momentum going by jumping in and taking some questions and comments from our listeners here on our listener corner. First is David Somerville, be a Patreon. This is what David has to say. The discussion of uses for the medicine skill a few weeks back got me thinking about the skill system, and particularly how it interacts with exploration in D&D. Exploration is sometimes cited as the missing pillar in 5e, with support for exploration scattered throughout the books. While I agree that specific mechanics for overland travel puzzles and other hallmarks of exploration are scattered, I began to wonder if I've been overlooking the obvious. Are skill checks the heart of exploration?
Mhm.
If combat rules adjudicate the engine of hit point exchange, combat, and conversation adjudicates the engine of inhabiting a character, role playing, don't the skills adjudicate discovering, interacting with, and altering the world around you? Exploration. I may be way off the mark here, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether it makes any sense to think of skill checks as the primary mode for exploration. And if so, how looking at it through this lens might affect how we, as designers and DMs, should think about writing or running exploration at the table. Beautiful question,
Yeah,
David.
lovely.
Beautiful question. Very astute. So let's just first say exploration means different things to different people as a pillar. But if you break it down like you do, exploration is more than just traveling through the dungeon or trampling through the forest or surviving in the desert, right? I always like to describe it as the state of going from the unknown to the known. You don't know something that you need to know, or you are trying to get somewhere that you don't understand yet. And so
Yeah.
exploration is that revelation. So for me, a role playing scene where people have to interrogate the town council to figure out which one is working with the evil dragon, that's exploration for me, not role playing. Uh, for the reasons that David says. So most skills do exactly that. They have a character either wanting to know something or learn something or get from point A to point B, whether physically or mentally, solving a problem. What we've seen, though, over the years through the editions is that D&D and the other clone games that, may use different systems, but they're basically D&D, uh, is all about, at the heart, removing enemies' hit points before they remove yours. And people are generally okay with microtransactions on that combat level. They're fine with, I roll a die, I either succeed or fail, and I do 10 hit points of damage, and okay, next person. They're even willing to go for like an hour of those microtransactions to get to that resolution.
Yeah.
They seem less likely to be okay doing those microtransactions for exploration. And they're okay with role playing without roles because it seems natural. It's acting. So they're okay with them saying something, the game master saying yes or no, and then you move on in a sort of organic way. It's that middle ground that people don't seem to be able to like or understand or gamify. Combat lovers don't want microtransactions that aren't combat. And role players feel awkward when they're trying to role play, but then checks come into the mix to, in the end, decide whether you succeed or fail. And I have not yet seen a D&D version that does it well or does it in a way that is accepted. And we could talk about fourth edition and skill challenges, and that sort of backs up this whole conundrum, if you will.
Yeah, that's all really fascinating. I love it, Shawn. I think skills are, a good lens to look at. Like, going back to that original question, should we be looking through the lens of skills as to what exploration is? Like, yes and no. They are not the only lens, but they are a great lens. And as you talked about, when you're talking to the dragon and you're making sort of skill checks and discovering things and unlocking things, that does then tickle that part of the, it brings in that pillar, right? And it tickles that part of your brain and stimulates that sense of wonder, discovery, unlocking, payoff, right? That's really sweet in the game. And you can put that into anything like you talked about. You can have it during combat, right? There's something around the corner. There's a glow coming from the pit. So do you want to check it out while we're fighting the goblins? Could pay off, right? And that adds exploration to a combat encounter. And so I think it can be a useful lens in that skills are sort of in the same way that attacks are just the necessary currency to get to victory in combat, if you look at it that way. Skills are sort of often the necessary engagement mechanism to give you that information back, right? It shows that there was something difficult that maybe or maybe not, you'll get it. So just like an attack roll, you make that skill check and you get that knowledge. And I think that that's a valid way to look at things. But it's not the only one in that I'm reading the 2024 DMG a lot, and it has some really great advice. But sometimes I think to myself, it could go a little bit further, right? Like it could say, like, why does a trap exist? Like, why are you putting this in an encounter, right? And that's part of the hidden part. You can't just look at it as skill checks or skills. It's how do you make this compelling? How is this encounter compelling? How is there something worthwhile to discover? That part has to be there that is more than skills, right?
Mm-hmm. I remember the first fourth edition adventure I ran was the playtest at Winter Fantasy in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And I was running Chris Tulloch's adventure, Escape from Sembia, I think was his name.
Yeah.
And, lots of fun combat for, learning 4E. And then we did a skill challenge, which is you're in the city and you need to escape. Everyone's looking for you. It's not going to be easy. Let's do this via a skill challenge. And it worked well in the sense that you could build a story based on those checks. Mm-hmm. It was you need 4 successes before 3 failures. But I didn't say that. Right. What I said was, here's the situation. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And it became a fun, rollicking chase without the minuscule mechanical measurements. That was three M's in a row. But it was still based on their roles. I try to grab a sheet and wrap it around me like it's a turban to disguise myself. Great.
Hmm.
Roll the check. Oh, you failed? I mark down the failure, but you don't know that. And I get to tell a fun story about the guard looking at you, looking away, then looking back at you, right? And we can make a fun narrative out of
Yeah.
it that the
Yeah.
players picked up on. So that is a way where exploration can be fun, but you need to find the right group with the right rules, with the right game master to be able to do it in a way where it does split that difference between role playing
Right.
and microtransactions. So yes, skill checks are definitely in that. It's a
Hmm.
matter of, well, like I said in the next question, the adventure is the game. And so the adventure needs to play out in a way that all the players like to make it the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you want to segue to that question?
Let's jump right into it. Lojan via Patreon says, I think the adventure is the game is a really interesting observation, and I'd love to hear you guys dig into it. I don't remember if you or I said it, Teos, but I've been talking a lot. So if you want to start here, I'll allow that.
Sure. Yeah. I think you mentioned this a couple of times when we're talking about sort of setting design and new rules. We've often seen that when we're on a project, right? Like yeah, you're building your subsystems or you're doing whatever, but people need to see it play out. And it's when you put it into the actual game that the rubber hits the road. Traps are on my mind, so forgive me for saying this over and over again. But I thought it was really interesting when I was looking at 2024 and 2014 in the DMG. Traps have a particular way that they're written. That's not how they appear in adventures,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a real
Right.
disconnect, right? And also, the rules are trying to give you a very like easy drop in thing, right? A spear trap, something like that. That's got a pit trap, a collapsing ceiling. But a lot of times, the interesting traps in adventures are actually quite wild, right? They're things that are much more interesting. Two objects teleport, switch with each other, and they're different weights or whatever. And you're figuring this out. It's got a little puzzle on it. And nothing in the DMGs tell you how to build that, right? And so it's adventures that end up carrying that weight, right?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this at Gamehole Con in our panel, where the rules for jumping for fifth edition were if you get a running start, you could jump a number of feet equal to your strength score. Great.
Hmm.
And then in the very first adventures that came out, even the ones from Wizards of the Coast,
Yeah.
there were athletics checks or acrobatics checks to jump. And so what that tells us is that rule of you can jump this far maybe isn't, it may be sound and it may be good, but it doesn't do what the game
Hmm.
promises,
Hmm.
which is make these small things exciting.
Yeah.
And so that's why we started seeing it in adventures. And a lot of times, as Teo said, we'll see a rule made. And then when the adventure comes out, even if it's directly from Wizards of the Coast, there's all these variations. And they're not variations
Yeah.
because, well, this is a little bit different situation. They're variations because the variation is what is fun at the table and what the players are going to want and what the
Yeah.
game sort of asks for.
And if we and sometimes we can design and forget what we should know, right? So like I always find it amazing that the Bastion rules don't address Troll Skull, the tavern that you get in the Waterdeep Dragon Heist adventure. Like it's not the right level. It's not, you can't really do it. Like it's so weird, right? Like that you're creating rules that don't match the adventure, and the adventure is the game. And so
Right.
to have all, you can have all this stuff in the background, but if it doesn't work up here in the front, then well, what? Hmm.
And that's why playtesting is so important. Not just playtesting an adventure to make sure the adventure is okay, but playtesting rules within an adventure to make sure those rules are okay. And if they make sense, both as rules and as a driver for the story that you're trying to tell. So many times I've made powers or rules or even very specific character facing things like feats. And then when a player that has a character with those rules plays the adventure and start using them in ways that I never imagined, it's either like, okay, good, I'm going to lean into that because it's fun, or like, oh boy, I need to rewrite that because that is not the way it is meant to be used. And it's not going to be fun for anyone in the game if that feat is used that way every time.
I've been reading Playing at the World, going through the chapters, and it's interesting that, they're at the point where this little booklet that I'm holding up, the Greyhawk rules have come out, and even Blackmore after it, which, boy, the reviews for Blackmore, it's really funny. And some of the criticism is, you still haven't told us how to play this game. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the only way to learn to play D&D is you have to like either read like Gary's write-ups in like a UK magazine, or you have to go to someone's house or a convention where someone is playing it and you go, oh, and then like it becomes this incredibly addictive thing. But you're not, you must experience it to understand it because the rules aren't even properly telling you, right?
Mm-hmm. And so, Lojan, that's why I always think of the adventure as being the game, because that's where these rules for the character and the rules that run the game come together to uh, be a blueprint for the story and the gameplay and the game loops and all of those things that actually are what we interact with as players and game masters together. Finally, Jack of Hearts 42 via YouTube. While I love the legacy and communal connection through shared storytelling of the D&D multiverse, settings, planes, and gods, how do you reconcile a homebrew campaign where your setting doesn't have different planes, but the rules, like spells and character features, directly interact with those otherworldly concepts? Teos, I feel like we've had this discussion a few times, maybe a different lens of it. But my answer is you don't reconcile them. It's you either don't reconcile them, as we've talked about, or if you do reconcile them, you have to do a lot of work to do so. What do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean it's hard work. You can look at settings like Dark Sun where they say no gods, and then like, well, where's healing coming from? Oh, there's potion fruits. And that's not enough. So you know what? They're elemental clerics, and let's detail those and give them spell lists and later supplements and try to bridge that gap. How are these spells working? Well, we either make a giant list of things that don't work because you're not actually contacting a god, or you say that they come from elemental spirits or nature spirits, or you have to reroute that. And that is a lot of work, right? If I were to do this in a home campaign, I probably would, for my sanity, do it on the fly and look at it as this being a fun discovery. Like, yeah, you can choose to take any of these things that maybe don't make sense. And when you cast them, let's discuss what they are and just hope that I can improvise something fun, because the amount of work would just be endless, right? To try to explain that. And so, you'd need something else, or you have to supplant everything onto your world. Like, well, there are the fiery mountains. That's where anything that's remotely elemental planar fire comes from, right? And any god that I can say is fire, well, it's from that area, and somehow reroute everything.
Yeah, I have dealt with this recently with the Grim Hollow Transformed Kickstarter, where I said to myself, what if there were no other planes? There are no the gods are dead in Grim Hollow. There are seraphs and demons, but no gods. So what happens if everything is cut off? And then I start going through the spells and the powers, and I'm like, well, banishment. I'd be happy to get rid of banishment, but that wouldn't work because where do you go? And then the summon spells, summoning things from the different planes. Like Teo said, if you leave those in, you have to come up with where they do come from. Then you get to abilities where people travel in the ethereal astral planes. Okay, what happens there? And I even went back to in 2014, there's the divine intervention ability of a 10th level cleric, where you roll percentile dice and there's a chance that your deity will intervene on your behalf, and it's very loose as to how that works. And I was like, I wonder what they did in 2024 with that. And what they do is instead of this random and then they do a big thing for you, it's like you can just cast a fifth level or lower spell. It works, but then you can't do it again for a while.
Hmm.
So, that is easier to
Yeah.
justify than my God's not really intervening. It's just I have drawn upon this well of power I have to cast this spell that I
Yep.
shouldn't be able to otherwise cast.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that are anything else to add there, Teos? Are you good?
No, no, this is great. And I feel the volume of news heading our way.
The news train is coming and we are tied to the tracks. So we are just going to power through and probably get smushed. But we start with layoffs and Hasbro's quarter 3 results with D&D being down slightly. I'll start with the layoffs and then you can dig into the quarter 3 results. So on October 23rd, Dixon Dubo communicated that he'd been laid off from Wizards. Dixon, if you don't know, has been discussed on the show before as he is the main point of contact for creators following the D&D Summit, and he's helped resolve issues with what like when we had the what can you stream about the 2024 players handbook. Dixon was the one who had to smooth all that out. So he's been crucial in translating fan and creator perspectives to the internal teams at Wizards. Not only was Dixon laid off, but 3 other staff members in the D&D area were let go as well. But that was the part of a larger Hasbro layoff where 100 people were laid off in a what was called a reorganization.
Yeah.
And you can, I'll let you explain that a little bit more, the reorganization.
Yeah, there was an interesting article on the reorganization that's taking place. Dan Rawson is getting more responsibilities in the area that you call direct sales. So this is like Hasbro Pulse, where people can directly go to the Hasbro Pulse website and buy things directly from Wizards with no distribution, or from Hasbro with no distribution. Secret Lair, where they sell Magic the Gathering special cards, and D&D Beyond. I reached out to Wizards to, in fact, through that creator relations email, I was curious whether it still worked. It does. They've someone back there scrambled to answer a question. And they answered that there has been no change to the reporting structure between Jess Lenzio and Dan Rawson. So that's all the same, and that, in theory, Dan still oversees the D&D area, even if he may be focused on kind of larger issues. The reorganization has a number of components to it. It talks about marketing being consolidated. So various employees were either removed or moved because they're now marketing core. And we see companies do this, and Wizards has done this, right? Back and forth between like, hey, it's a studio model, everything should be replicated for different teams, or it's a central hub area where one thing is consolidated and helps everybody else. So we're more in that kind of hub area. So marketing is now in one general area. That may be good for D&D. We'll see. And maybe it's possible, this is completely conjecture, Shawn, right? This is just Teos imagining, but maybe this marketing change could in part be a way to try to address that cancellation of the Random House distribution deal to help Wizards market directly to Target, Walmart, and other such entities. Because the changes to Bookscan are so substantial that you'd have to think that you'd want those numbers to go up, even if you're seeing big numbers elsewhere in how D&D is sold.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. We're seeing a complete revolution. We're seeing TTRPGs become a grown-up venture.
Yeah.
Before it was always sort of fly by the seat of your pants. It's really not worth the revenue that we're generating is not worth putting too much focus on it. So we'll just continue to do what we've been doing since TSR days.
Yeah.
Which did not go well for TSR. But yeah, so I think going all the way back to when they said D&D will become a $1 billion brand, we've seen the downside of that pretty strongly.
Yeah.
And hopefully at some point we will see the upside of that as well. And if being able to market not just D&D, but all RPGs more efficiently and more widely, that might be a good thing, but
Mhm.
it does take restructuring, and restructuring is painful.
And the danger is always that the folks that you have at the top don't quite understand what's happening, right? And so if
For
you're
sure.
just a marketing dude from, Amazon or wherever, like you just, those intricacies can be lost on you, and that can lead to bad decisions or inefficient ones.
Mhm. Yep.
Speaking of inefficiency, should we talk about those sweet, sweet Hasbro Q3 earnings?
You go, Teos, you go.
I love doing this, or at least I've grown to
I
love
know.
it. Yes, we have gone through all the numbers on the recent third quarter yearly report from Hasbro. The earnings and call were, as usual, very interesting, and we've been tracking these for ages, so it's always fun for us to kind of see how this has panned out over time. Overall, Hasbro revenue is down 15% this quarter to 1.28 billion. If you exclude that E1 sale, I don't know when we're going to stop having that be part of it, but it's still on the books. That reduces it to being down 9%. But it's still, you're around down 10% for your business for the quarter. That ain't good. But we sure will try to paint this in a rosy picture if we're Hasbro, and they did that. Now, the net revenue is up from 16 million to 244 million. Magic grew, but Wizards is overall down 5% for the quarter due to Baldur's Gate 3 slowing. For the third quarter, Wizards and Digital Gaming has 404 million in revenue, and tabletop gaming component is 296.8 million. That's up 2% due to Magic the Gathering. We're going to get into the analysis a little further, but D&D appears to be down within that, which is fascinating. Q3 Wizards of the Coast operating profit is 181 million. Consumer products, that's your toy type stuff, down 10%. But hey, you know what they did, Shawn?
They beat projections.
They beat projections, and that's, what this game is like and why these calls are handled in certain ways and all that. There's all kinds of emphasis on cost savings and efficiencies. Yep, that includes layoffs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take over.
Yeah.
Chris Cox did comment on D&D a bit. They did not highlight D&D, but it was mentioned by Chris Cox, CEO of Hasbro, including the dynamics we're observing across Magic and D&D in both analog and digital reinforce our confidence in the long-term health of the brands. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. I'm an investor. Hooray. Let me give you more money.
Yep.
Chris also said that the updated Player's Handbook for 5th edition is now our fastest selling product in D&D's 50-year history, beating plan by over 50%. And our acquisition of D&D Beyond continues to pay off, driving D&D's total mix of direct-to-consumer revenue from zero at that time, so at the time they acquired D&D Beyond, to 60% today, with registered users more than doubling to 19 million. So what this says is obviously when we bought D&D Beyond, our direct-to-consumer revenue was zero.
Right.
Now it is 60% of our business. I believe that's what
Well,
it's saying.
yeah. And what we don't know is how are they counting a bundle, right?
Right.
So when you sell a bundle that includes something on D&D Beyond and the book, are you counting that in both categories? Like that was both physical and digital? Are you splitting it? Are you saying that was all digital? How you do that really varies, and it's hard to say. So we're going to do some math later, and it's going to involve this 60%. When we last reported for Q2, I was with the help of a show listener able to break down that essentially it was 50-50. So now they're saying digital is on top, but we really don't know how it's being counted.
Right.
And maybe it's as simple as, well, because Random House has been canceled, then, things are more on this side, or is it a win because everything is stable and things go up? I know everything's not stable because you can look at the book scan and those numbers are unbelievably lower than they used to be. At the same time, I know I'm hearing from basically any staff member I talk to tells me books are flying out the door. We are ordering more than ever before, and there's an interview that talks about that too. We'll get into. So somehow all these things are true, right? That like BookScan is down. The Random House deal is dead, and so therefore no books are on shelves in places where you want them. But somehow you're also selling amazingly. So to me, that says it could be way better. Here we're trumping up this 60%. And yes, direct-to-consumer is great, but as many companies find out, direct-to-consumer can also result in far lower sales. So we'll see how it goes.
Right. And every anecdotal story I hear from people who frequent game stores are saying, I'm trying to get my book through my game store and I can't. They have no access to these books. So that makes you wonder, are people out there still waiting? Are they ordering from Amazon? Are they ordering it digitally? Could it be higher? Or does that lack of books push up the digital side? And Teos has done better look at that.
And D&D Beyond, here what we're looking at, because I track these numbers every time I mention them, it's 1 million higher from 18 million Q2 to 19 million now. And he says it's doubled. But when D&D Beyond was acquired, they said it was 10 million. So it's not quite doubled, maybe almost.
Right.
But, and that's assuming all these numbers, none of them got puffed up at any particular point. So he says doubled. It's not yet doubled. And if anything, the rate has seemed to slow down of new accounts. Monopoly Go, switching a bit, seems to be steady with 10 million in licensing revenue per month. That is great news. They thought it would really go lower. Roughly 105 million in revenue for the year. So, hold on to that in your brain of 10 million licensing revenue there. Baldur's Gate 3 is expected to contribute about 35 million for the full year now. That's also a little better than they expected. So if we look at Q3, Magic the Gathering and Hasbro gaming net revenues are up 3%. Hasbro total gaming is down 6%. And what we then start to do is break down like what is going on the Wizards and D&D side. Tabletop gaming is up 2% with 296.8 million, as we mentioned. Digital license gaming is 107.2, which is down 19%. That's that sort of Baldur's Gate slowdown. And Wizards says that this business mix shift to digital, that's their quote, is driving profit improvements. And they say that Q3 growth in Hasbro gaming, Magic the Gathering, and Transformers was offset by declines in the remaining franchise brands. Well, if you look at the list of those, that includes D&D. So that tells us D&D was down for the quarter. So Shawn, I've just sold Punch, right? The fastest selling player's handbook ever, fastest selling book ever. How are my revenues down in D&D from Q3 last year, which was a weird year, right? Where everything was late and shifted. How is it down from last quarter where I wasn't selling much of anything? And the only thing I can come up with is that there is this distribution problem going on, but I don't really know. Something's going on here, right?
Exactly. Reprinting a book does not mean selling a book. And so unless there's some lag in bookkeeping where we're not seeing the revenue from the sales yet, then I don't know. I don't have an answer because, I don't know.
And, the news for the future is sort of similar, right? Consumer products expected to be down lower. Baldur's Gate 3 is going to slow down further. I don't know what D&D sales are going to do, but it's not a hugely rosy picture for Hasbro, no matter how they try to spin it. As always, I tried to figure out with our friend Scipio, how big is D&D? We reconstructed the D&D numbers. Scipio did large work here. We have to make assumptions on the licensing for Baldur's Gate 3. Going with the 30 million they said for Monopoly Go, assuming 7.3 million for Baldur's Gate 3. That says that D&D is a bit over 70 million total. Chris Cox says digital is 60%. If we go by that, that means digital is 42 million and D&D paper is 28.8 million for the quarter. But they're rough estimates. and we don't know if things are getting double counted or whatever. If that 60% is really 60% or a way of looking at things, right? But it's somewhere around D&D being, 42 million for paper, which is interesting. And I don't know, it's definitely lower than last quarter. I don't know why. Like I can't possibly explain it. So there's some real mysteries there that I hope over time we can figure out. And if you're hearing this show and you have some thoughts, let us know.
Sounds good. From the business side to the business side of the screen, we are getting more DMG previews. We got a look at the Lore Glossary. They did review a few of the entries. So if the game master needs to know who a Serarak is, they've got you covered. Great Modron March, Austriel Silverhand, Adamantine, more. We don't know the full list yet, but it looks like this is sort of the mini Wikipedia of D&D knowledge for game masters. If you need to know something, you can go to that lore glossary and look it up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, some of these that they would mention, I'm like, I don't know that that's a must know, but okay. It's fun lore. Can't go wrong, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and either they're doing that because these NPCs locations were highlighted in their most recent adventures, or they will be highlighted in upcoming adventures is one theory that you could go on. So maybe we will be seeing something about the Great Modron March in an upcoming product. Maybe not. It's hard to say. We also get some information on encounter design. In EN World, James Wyatt acknowledged that removing the adventuring day had more to do with it not being something that was reflected in common play. He, quote, "Our math was off 10 years ago, and we're trying to fix it, especially at level 10 and higher. The guidelines we gave you in 2014 were producing encounters that just weren't challenging enough, and the monsters weren't challenging enough, so the monsters do get dialed up a bit, the encounters get dialed up quite a bit, and that's all to the goal of making a fun encounter for characters at that level."
Yeah, my next video is looking at this. It's kind of shocking how the encounter design rules have changed. And we, like, if all they had done, right, if you took 2014 and you did what they did to encounter design, that probably could work. I'm a little worried. I'm worried at low levels. So if you talk about low levels not needing a boost, they basically moved what used to be medium is now low. What used to be deadly is now high. And I don't know that we needed that at low levels. So did characters get way stronger? Yeah, not in hit points. I don't know. And then above like levels 5 or 7, you still that quarter get shift to basically 1 over, which I think absolutely a lot of DMs are doing that. So it's a good call. But then you also get additional math on top of it. And I looked through some sample encounters. It's amazing how much harder they are now. But I'm hearing that monsters are going to be redesigned, right? And we saw some examples where they hit significantly harder, like that green dragon. So I really hope they tested all this. Because there are a lot of moving parts. Your PCs have moved, your encounter design tables have moved, and your monsters have moved. And hopefully that was all lockstep and carefully play tested through a number of different, example encounters and so on, because that's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and I hope they let DMs like me, who would have longer adventuring days to make up that difference, know that, oh, by the way, you don't need to have 10 encounters in a day before the characters begin to run out of resources or feel threatened, because we've upped up the deadliness to make only 3 or 4 encounters in a day seem as deadly as what we were saying before.
Yeah, and not thinking about an encounter day can be a bit of a trap as a designer. Like I remember that when the Healing Spring issue came up, that was around the time that I think it was Jeremy Crawford said, well, we don't really think about the adventuring day now. We just assume you're totally refreshed for any encounter you face. And that can lead to that kind of a thing where you say, well, it's fine if I just replenish everybody's hit points because we're all assuming that you start at the top anyway. But that's not what a long dungeon crawl is like, or a long, wilderness trek with 3 encounters is like. You're not, like, it does matter. So you're either killing off your characters or making them impossible to kill. And that, yeah, if you I think you do want to have some thought to it. So it's interesting to me that they're just removing the adventuring day.
We get a look at the new DM screen with new art showing the PCs working together. Images showed conditions on one panel in a larger font. A second panel has improvising damage examples, like what's 1d10, etc. Damage severity by level. A third panel shows typical AC of items, DCs, light sources, obscured areas, and so on. While the fourth panel has travel pace, travel terrain, cover, audible distances, outdoor visibility, and weather. And I, for one, am happy that they show all the conditions in one panel because I might have to start using a DM screen because right now all the conditions are not in one place in the player's handbook. They are spread out over that index at the end or the glossary at the end, which makes it harder to find things.
Yeah, I was just reading someone saying how that glossary sounds great until you start actually trying to find things. And then you don't know whether it's under this or under that, or is it back in the actual text reference, right? And so, yeah, things like what is, can you change the skills that are the skill DCs for tools, and you have to read that particular little bit on page 10 to know that you can, and yeah.
Yeah. Polygon says that the DMG already has more copies printed and the player's handbook is exceeding expectation. So Wizards offered 3 times as many copies as in 2024 and then ordered more. So the bump in the player's handbook has caused Wizards to make a bump in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yeah.
What else about that has been said to us?
So it was interesting. Jess Lanzillo says the English language version of the 2024 Player's Handbook alone, which I don't know if there is another one yet, achieved in just 1 month what took nearly 2 years for the 2014 edition across all language versions available in that time frame. So back then they launched in multiple languages, and this was able to do it in just 1 month what took 2 years. They also, Jess says, and this is really interesting to me, big box stores like Walmart and Target won't see their copies until later this year or early 2025, but that says they will see them. Right, because currently there's no deal there, so they must be hammering out a deal with these stores to make up for that Random House distribution lapse. Localizations of the Player's Handbook 2024 version will also begin to reach those markets in the same time frame, so later this year or early 2025, in French, Italian, German, and Spanish, and they're all currently in production, we heard.
And then, as I said, they've already ordered a second batch of the DMG for the 2024 version based on the demand for the player's handbook. So good on them. Good on you all for buying and hopefully enjoying 2024. We have more news, believe it or not. D&D store one-shots have been announced. They're launching these one-shot days to celebrate the Dungeon Master's Guide 2024 release on November 12th. The program itself runs from November 4th through December 31st, supporting one-night quests from Candlekeep Mysteries, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, and Keys from the Golden Vault. Stores will receive a PDF copy of the 3 adventures. Each adventure is compatible with the 2024 rules and aimed at both new and experienced players. To support the in-person event, each Wizards Play Network store will receive 10 codes for digital D&D Beyond dice, and stores can schedule and report events in the WPN Wizards event link system. Interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, I'm glad we're seeing some store energy. It's interesting that they're using older adventures, oldish. It's not something that came out this year. And they're not exactly using the 5th anniversary ones, even though they have those available. Interesting. And then giving you digital dice for running an in-person event is a thing. But, I know what they're trying to do there. It's, I get it.
It doesn't take a marketing genius to figure out they're trying to drive people to D&D Beyond. Hey, if it's useful, go for it. We also have the 50th anniversary D&D play series. This will be a series of play experiences from October 29th through November 25th. Excuse me. Using the D&D 50th anniversary adventures, Lost Caverns of Sokanth, and then the follow-up of Scions of Elemental Evil, which ran at Gen Con. What do you know about these?
Yeah, so Lost Caverns we saw before. It ran at a number of different places. But Scions of Elemental Evil, I was able to take a look at it and confirm that this idea, they say beneath the temple of elemental evil is this labyrinth of whatever, but really it's on level 1. It features Queen Yolande and Celine, which were reviewed as part of our Greyhack coverage. She provides a quest to the characters, which is interesting because, back then she's very standoff. In the setting, she's really like not sure that she should reach out beyond her borders. But here, she hires adventurers to investigate the ground floor of the famed Temple of Elemental Evil and stop a parallel elemental queen. And so you do a kind of mix of like talking and investigating. And then, of course, there's going to be some combat in there. It is, I guess, based on the open that was at Gen Con, but it is not the open. It's been, kind of reformatted for this. I did not see the open, so I don't know how it changed. This is definitely not a multi-table or competitive or anything like that. So stores will get a copy via D&D Beyond, and it sounds as if the additional adventures will be provided later dates, February 4th, and then March 3rd for dates coinciding with the release. So we'll see.
Okay. All right, Teos, we have room for one more news bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think something that I've seen is this Critical Role in Dimension 20 live shows, folks starting to get tickets for these. We saw over the last 2 years a few of these big shows coming in and saying like, okay, we're going to offer, being in the UK at an arena and so on. And apparently that has panned out, right? Like Dimension 20 did Madison Square Garden last year. Now, Dimension 20 has 3 shows next year in LA, Seattle, and Las Vegas. Critical Role announced 6 new stadium shows from December 7th this year to October 7th of next year. New Jersey, Chicago, Indianapolis as part of Gen Con, New York, and then Sydney and Melbourne in Australia. I saw one show where the links were working and it had $75 for a Critical Role show as the standard, up to $450 for VIP packages. So we've got links in our show notes to where it talks about Dimension 20 and the Critical Role site that has the anniversary show information. And one last related bit of news there that Amazon has renewed, as expected, the Vox Machina animated series to a 4th season, which is also really, really impressive.
Yeah, that's very impressive for something where we weren't exactly sure if it was going to take off in the mainstream as opposed to the RPG sphere. But maybe the RPG sphere is now mainstream. It's hard to say.